Aino Corry is an agile expert, an agile teacher, an agile conference speaker, an agile book writer, and now she's here, and I would say give her a warm hand.
Thank you. Ja, so ich möchte gerne diese Präsentation in Deutsch machen, aber das kann ich leider nicht. Aber ich will sagen, ich verstehe meistens Deutsch. So let that be a warning. If you want to talk about me, then don't use German, at least not when I can hear it. So I'm very happy to be talking to you today. And if any of you saw my tweet, then I brought 2 books to give away after the keynote. They are signed. And if you want one, you should come up here after the keynote and give me a good reason why you should have this book. And then you can be one of the 2 who can walk home with a book like that. Right, so without further ado, I've been interested in retrospectives for the past 15 years. Before that, I did a PhD in something a bit more technical, but I'm more and more interested in communication and how to make people shut up at the right time. So that's what I get paid for, making people shut up. And what I want for you to get out of this keynote is to feel like this when you hear there's a retrospective time. They're not running away, they're actually dancing. So I want you to be like, yes, it's retrospective time. I want all developers to be really happy about this. So normally I talk to just the facilitators and I tell them how can they make it better for the developers and the other team members to have these retrospectives. How can they enjoy them more? How can they make them feel it's not a waste of time? But today I'm going to see it from another perspective. I'm going to see it from the perspective of the people who are actually in the retrospective. So I'm not just putting all the blame on the facilitator anymore. I'm saying that what could we all do to help us improve the retrospectives? So I want to talk about a story from real life. The retrospective was a waste of time. I don't know, have any of you ever tried a retrospective that was a waste of time? Yes, wonderful. I'm speaking to the right audience here. When you walk away, you'll never waste time in retrospectives anymore. So this team, they had a retrospective, and they came up with 2 action points. And these were valid action points. It was great action points, and you've probably seen them before. They wanted more pair programming, and they wanted better architecture documentation. So I've just taken some random things from all the retrospectives that I see, and these are 2 things that often come up. We want more pair programming, and we want better architecture documentation. Right. But how can that be bad? So how can we ruin that with such good action points? Well, if we don't talk about it, if we don't follow up on the action points, if nobody ever asks what happened to the action points from the last retrospective, then the retrospective is a waste of time, right? Because then we just forget it. And even if we follow up on it, even if we ask at the next retrospective, or maybe even in the morning stand-ups, what's happening with the retrospective and action points? Well, if you can't see them, if you can only see the other things in your backlog, if you can only see the things that the shareholders or the stakeholders want right now, then you forget about the action points. So you need to make them visible, either in your backlog or in front of your computer on a post-it note or on the wall in the room where you sit. You have to make them visible, because if you can't see them, you won't do anything. So they're asking me, but I know, even if we follow up and we make them visible, it's still not working. What's the problem? And I say, well, maybe you're not prioritizing them. Maybe you just put them into the backlog, but very quickly they'll end at the bottom of the backlog, right? So all other things are at the top, and those are more important because we've got people screaming at us for doing these things. So the things that we want to do to work better together, to have more fun at work, to create better quality, we don't do that because it's not on top of the prioritized list. But even if we prioritize it, even if we actually put it on top of our list, it still goes wrong. Okay, I say, it's because you haven't specified it, right? Because if you say we want to do more pair programming or better architecture documentation, that's not very specific. And that's what I see people take out of retrospectives all the time, action points like that. If it's not specific, if it's not measurable, then how in the world are you going to follow up on it and see when it's actually done and when it's not done, and if you got the thing out of it that you wanted to get out of it? So you have to specify them. Right, so, okay, so we follow up, they're visible, we've specified them. Can it still go wrong? Yes, it can still go wrong. We need somebody to be responsible for these action points. So sometimes people say to me, oh, but it's the whole team. It's a team that will do this. The team will take, we're such a good team, we'll do this together. And I say, no, won't work with me. We need somebody who's responsible. I need somebody at the next retrospective to ask, what happened with this action point? And it doesn't have to be the one that has to do everything, but it has to be the one that initiates it and makes sure that there's a status for that action point or experiment at the next retrospective. Right, so we've got all these things done. Can things still go wrong? Yes, they can still go wrong. I've actually got 12 things that can go wrong just for this one point, so bear with me. What if there isn't a start or a deadline on these action points? People are saying, okay, I'll do this, but probably not in the next sprint, and probably not in the next sprint, and probably not in the next sprint, right? So I always try to say to people, I want to know when you start doing this. When will you start reminding people about this at the stand-ups? When will you start implementing this? When will you start communicating with the architects about better documentation? When will you start doing that? We need a start date, and sometimes we even need a deadline. Sometimes we need to say, when do you think this has amounted to something that you can evaluate to see whether we actually got the expected outcome? Well, maybe it's in a month, maybe it's the next sprint, maybe it's the next year. And that leads me to the next thing that can go wrong. Sometimes we're running around trying to do things, but we can't, because they're long-term goals. The action points are things that will actually take you 3 to 6 months to do, and you put them in as an action point for the next sprint. Of course, you would never do this. The people in this room would never be so stupid, but other people, you know, other people would do that. And then when you notice that, by talking about it at the next retrospectives, you say, what happened to this action point? And it was like, well, we didn't actually get it done. And then you think of all the things I said. Was there somebody responsible? Yes. Was it visible? Yes. We're following up right now. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, it was a long-term goal. So can we break it up into smaller bits so that we can get something done? Yes, we can do that. So don't have long-term goals at action points. Another thing that can go horribly wrong is an anti-pattern that I call in the soup. So what you see here is the octopus is trying to lift a weight, and I think of the octopus as a team, because 60% of the brain of an octopus is in its tentacles, and the rest is in its head. So it's a bit like a team, right? All the team members have intelligence, hopefully, but then when you put them together, it's even better, like an octopus. But sometimes the team wants to discuss things that they can't do anything about. So in those cases, I say to them, well, just simple activity. You draw a little circle, and you say, in this circle, you have all the things we can do something about. You have a bigger circle. In that circle, you have all the things you can influence, and outside, you have the soup. And if you notice that you constantly discuss things at the retrospective that are in the soup, then you're wasting your time. Because things in the soup are things you can't change. It's things you just have to accept and adapt to. I mean, sometimes it's great to let out some air about things, but it becomes a waste of time if that's what you spend your retrospectives on. And then people say, well, but those are the important things, and then retrospectives are a waste of time again. Nah. Not with that voice, but almost. And then I say, well, what you can do then, if it's in the soup, you can think about it and say, are there some things we can carve out of this that we can actually influence or do? Much like when you are creating microservices out of a monolith, right? You're carving something out that you can actually do something about. You're not expecting to be able to do all of it, but maybe there's a little thing that you can actually do. And suddenly, it becomes something that's much more actionable than it was before. And that's something that you can talk about, that soup activity, both after you've gathered the data and you're looking at the problems, but also when you've made the brainstorm about what to do, you have all these proposed action points, and some of the action points are things that the team can go out and do, but some of the action points are things that the team can't do anything about. And it's important not to choose an action point that the team can't do anything about. If you remember the 2 action points, the one was better software architecture documentation. Maybe this team can't do anything about that. Maybe they can just complain to other people about that, and then it's a bad action point. And then, of course, it won't get done. And then, of course, the retrospective is a waste of time. I hope that the only thing you will get out of it is not the retrospective is a waste of time, but let's see about that in the end. So the next anti-pattern that I'll talk about is called Wheel of Fortune. And Wheel of Fortune is like when you go to a Tivoli and you roll this Wheel of Fortune, and sometimes you're lucky, and what you get makes you win something, and other times you're not lucky, and you just lose. In a lot of retrospectives, people put up 3 posters, say, this is what we should start do, this is what we should stop do, this is what we should continue do. Sometimes they also have do more of, do less of. And that's a great way of gathering data. There are no problems in that. The only problem is if you jump directly from the data gathering to the conclusions. Because if you get something like, right, we want to start having more pair programming. That's something that I see often. And that's great in itself, it's not a problem. But if your action point is then, to make it more specific, we'll do pair programming 3 days a week, 3 hours a day with all these people, then, I mean, it will work if the problem is actually that they forget to do pair programming. But what if the lack of pair programming is just a symptom of the problem that's different? It could be that the reason why they don't do pair programming is because they don't know how to do it online. It could be the reason they don't do pair programming is because they simply don't believe it's efficient. It could be that they don't have that trust with each other. And then enforcing that more pair programming will not help. It will actually make things worse. So sometimes when you've gathered data, you really want to jump to the conclusions. And as developers, we're trained to come up with solutions to problems. Almost in the same time we're saying what the problem is, we come up with a solution. And we're really good at that. And it's great. But it's not great for reflection. So when you've gathered data, make sure that you take time to generate insights about the data that you've gathered. Make sure to talk about, why is this happening? Why is this happening again? Could we have done this differently? And of course, when you're talking about that, you have to remember the prime directive. And the prime directive is from Norm Kurth, the first book about retrospectives that says, blah, 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 blah. But what it means is everybody did the best they could, right? And that's the mindset you should have. Everybody did the best they could. But because if you have that mindset and you really believe in that mindset, then people feel more safe and they feel more secure, and they can say, well, I didn't test this because I didn't have the right data. I didn't have the right data because I didn't ask for the right data. I didn't ask for the right data because I was embarrassed. I thought that I should already know what the right data was. Something like that. Things like that can come up if you have a conversation about things. And you can do that in a million different ways. You can do that either just by having a conversation about these post-it notes, but you can also go into a 5 why situation where you have like an interview where you ask each other, so why did the test fail? As I said before, well, the test failed because we didn't have the right data. Why didn't we have the right data? Well, because we didn't ask. We can also go full Monty and have a fishbone diagram, an Ishikawa diagram that some of you may know, where you draw a fish skeleton and you put the problem at the head, and then you ask people to brainstorm for things that could have been the reason for this. It could be that we missed the deadline, right? And then you have everybody brainstorming, what could have caused this missed deadline? And then some people might say, well, we set the requirements too early, we have too much tech debt, we didn't prioritize. Sometimes some people will say the coffee was cold or the desks were too small, and that's okay. I mean, it might not be the real cause for missing the deadline, but it's fine that they get it out of their minds. So everything is okay when you do something like that. But the important thing here with the Wheel of Fortune is that it really is a Wheel of Fortune and unfortune. And I think it's so sad to see retrospectives like Groundhog Days going over and over again in the same problems. And they say, why don't the retrospectives solve these problems? We've had 3 retrospectives where we talked about this. Well, maybe you were talking about the symptoms instead of the causes. Another thing that often goes wrong, even if you found the right cause and you found something that the team can actually do something about, and you have somebody who's responsible and it's specified and everything like that, is the dot voting. So I assume that some of you are using dot voting in your retrospectives. We use dot voting to figure out which of all these things do we want to talk about. We use dot voting to figure out which of all these things do we want to do, what should be the action points for next time. But sometimes with democracy, there is a problem. as we've seen in some countries in the past few years, that when the majority wins, the minority can sometimes be a little bit upset about it. And that's the same in a team. So I once had a team where I had 7 developers, and then I had 2 UX experts. And whenever they had a retrospective, they used dot voting. And it was great for everybody, except for the 2 UX developers, because sometimes they had other priorities than the developers. And that meant that with that amount of people that were developers, all that they thought was important was the thing that we discussed at the retrospective and the things that we took away as action points at the retrospective. So there are a million different ways of doing something about this, but one is, I think, really important, is just the awareness. How do we make decisions? Is it democracy? And if it is democracy, then what about the minority? Because if they don't really buy into this, then they might not want to do it, and sometimes they'll even play against it in the next sprint. Is it a dictatorship? Is it the Scrum Master or somebody else who decides? That could be. Is it consensus? Does everybody have to agree, like in the 70s in the commune? That's fine, that's great, but sometimes it takes a little extra time. So what I've started doing when we've come up with the action points, just with the democratic vote, is that I ask for consent. So I ask everybody in the team, are you okay with these action points? Are you okay with these action points? Are you okay with these action points? And sometimes they just say yes, and that's fine. Sometimes they say, yeah, if we could just change it so that it's not every day that we have this check-in, or maybe we can only have the demo every other week or something like that, then I'll be okay with it. And by asking them for their consent, you're saying, well, I want you to be a part of this decision, even though your team didn't win in the votes. Then can you live with this? Can we change it so that you can live with this? And then it becomes their responsibility as well, because then they're on board with this. So thinking about this is important when you make decisions in a group like that. Another thing is the loudmouth. And I don't know if you know any loudmouths in any of your teams, but sometimes there is a loudmouth. And it's better if the loudmouth is the one standing on stage like this, because then I can just talk and talk and talk, and nobody can interrupt me. So that's the only good thing to do with loudmouths. But loudmouths can take 2 different types in the team. Sometimes they're the ones that interrupt all the time. And sometimes they're the ones that, once they start talking, you can't make them stop talking. They just go on and on and on. And even though it's very interesting what they're saying, they have a tendency to sometimes talk in a cyclic way. They're actually saying the same thing again and again, over and over, with new words. So what do you do with a loudmouth? Well, you can do different things with a loudmouth. One thing you can do is that you can say, let's not have a plenum discussion right now. Should we talk about this in smaller groups? Because if you divide people into smaller groups, maybe 2 or maybe 3, then at least the loudmouth will only contaminate that little group. Because loudmouths, they like plenum discussions. They love plenum discussions because everybody has to listen to them. And if they're very good at doing that, and they have a high place in the hierarchy, then they'll just talk and talk, and nobody else will be heard. So you can do something about that, luring them into smaller groups where they'll only talk to some other person. It could also be that you change some of the discussions into written discussions. So you make use of the post-it notes. So people use post-it notes, or they write things in the document instead of just talking and talking. It could also be that you talk to the loudmouth after the retrospective and you say, I've noticed that you're very intelligent. It's always a good idea to compliment people. That makes them listen, because if you start with something like that, then they think maybe there's more, so I'll keep listening. And so you're very intelligent, and what you're saying is extremely useful for the team. Maybe not that's too much, right? You wouldn't even believe that, but you catch my drift. And you say, but at a retrospective, it's the team that should be heard. So we need to hear what other people are saying as well. So it's great that you're saying something. It's great that you're keeping the conversation going. But could we have some sort of sign so that you shut up at times when I think that you're going too much? And then sometimes they're really shocked. They're like, am I a loudmouth? No, it's that other person who wants to talk all the time. And it's really interesting how sometimes loudmouths, they have no clue. No clue. They don't think they speak very much. So it can be good for them. I've sometimes had loudmouths where I have this conversation with them. They're actually really happy afterwards, and their wives are really happy afterwards, because they've suddenly understood that maybe they should look at people from time to time and see, are they still listening to my story, or am I just sort of going on and on? But what you shouldn't do is that you shouldn't, in public, shame them, because you don't want them to lose face. So that's why I'm saying, talk to them afterwards. I once had a meeting with two loudmouths, and afterwards they both came up to me and said, "Why didn't you make the other one shut up? He was speaking all the time." And I said, "Well, let me tell you about yourself." And he's actually in the book, one of these people, and he's recognized himself. Sometimes you have a silent one at a retrospective as well. That can be because they come from a culture where you're not supposed to speak up, or maybe they're shy or they're introvert. And it's actually all the same things that goes for somebody who's silent. Because plenum discussions are not very good for people who are silent, because they don't say anything. So try to, if you have a loudmouth or a silent one or both, try to cut people up in smaller groups. And you can do it online now with the breakout rooms. And the way we're going with COVID, we'll do that again very soon. So luckily, all the video installations have that now. Now, sometimes it's important to figure out why they're loudmouths and why they're silent. So sometimes you can ask them that as well, because sometimes loudmouths are loudmouths because they have something very important to say, and they're so worried that they won't get it said. And if that's the problem, then I do something called a round robin, where I ask everybody the same question, or I ask them to choose a post-it note or something like that, and then they know that at some point, my finger will point at them, and it'll be their turn to say something. This is also sometimes good for the silent ones, because they can get used to the thought that they'll have to say something soon. But talk to them, because sometimes it can give them even more anxiety that they know they'll be pressured to say something that they haven't decided themselves. So talk to the silent ones before you do something like that. It's interesting with all these different personalities how you should make it work for all of them. We also have something called the negative one. And the negative one is the one who really hates retrospectives, thinks it's a terrible waste of time. Why can't I spend my time on real work, right? Because real work is sitting alone in front of that fancy keyboard we saw before, and that's the only valid way of spending time. None of you here today think like that, obviously, but you probably know somebody. Oh, there's somebody there. Okay, right. We'll have a little chat afterwards. So what I do with the negative one is that I try to turn them into a champion skeptic from Linda Rising's book, Fearless Change. If you've read that, if you haven't, you should. Fearless Change. So there's a pattern there called champion skeptic. And what she does is brilliant. So if there's somebody who's against what you're doing, like introducing retrospectives or teaching in a specific way, then you sit down with them. And again, you start with that compliment. You say, I have noticed that you're really intelligent and you're really good at seeing through bullshit. And they're like, yeah, I'm really good at seeing through bullshit. And then so maybe you can help me, because we have to do these retrospectives. So can we do this in a way that you think will help? And then, of course, sometimes I say, yeah, if we can do it in 10 minutes, that'll be great. I'm like, how do we actually get something out of it? And then if they help you coming up or deciding the activities or something like that, then they become your champion skeptic. And one of I've met a few of them in my career as a retrospective facilitator, and some of the champion skeptics becomes people who really love retrospectives because they feel they're part of the movement and they feel that they can do something about it, and now they love retrospectives and everybody should have retrospectives. It's true. I mean, I could lie, but it's true. The last thing that can go wrong, even if you've made sure that the loudmouth is not talking all the time, the silent one gets to say something, the negative one is not obstructive, you have a specified action point that the team can do something about, and you know what to start, what to end. But if you have a retrospective online where people are not on the camera, then it's really, really, really difficult to have a meeting where people are supposed to listen to each other and interpret each other's body language. Because if we have a retrospective in the real world or a meeting on site, then we can look at body language. We can see whether people are sort of against it, whether they're rolling their eyes, whether they're really eager to say something, whether they're standing with their feet towards somebody that they like or their back towards somebody that they don't like. which makes things easier as a facilitator. When it's online, you only have that little screen. And if the only thing you have is a black screen with initials, it's super difficult for a facilitator to figure out whether somebody wants to say something, whether they want things to speed up, whether they want to do something else. So as you can see here, the little octopus has put up a cardboard octopus, so it looks like he's part of the meeting. And I was actually facilitating a retrospective a few weeks ago in Denmark. I won't name any names. And there was one there. It was a team I hadn't facilitated for before. And he came late. And when he entered the retrospective, he was online, as the only one in the group was online. And I didn't know that he would be online. He wasn't on camera, and he was muted. But people convinced me that he was actually part of the retrospective, and he was really happy about being part of the retrospective. But at the end, when we actually had a question that was directed at him, we all looked at the initials and the little mute icon. It was just complete silence. And we all thought, what's he doing now? And then somebody said, yeah, well, so the reason why he's online, he's actually in the building. Okay. Well, he's online because he's got 2 other meetings at the same time. So sometimes when people are not showing their video, it's back to the symptoms and the causes. There might be a really good reason for them not being on video, but there could also be a really crappy reason for them not being on video. And I think it's fair to ask them, the symptom that I see, that I can't see your face, is that the problem, or is that the symptom of another problem? So I think it's important always to question, why are we having retrospectives? So that we can get the right things out of them. We're not just having them to tick them off. We're having them to change things, to become better, to learn, and to have fun together. I think it's good to have fun and to laugh. It's easy to laugh at other people at retrospectives, so you can always do that. So if I should go through the 12 points that I want you to remember all of them. So use the cameras. Don't allow the loudmouths to take the floor. Consider other ways of making decisions than democracy. Focus on causes, not symptoms. Make sure to decide on something that the team can fix themselves, not something that's out of their circle of influence. Split up the long-term goals into shorter goals or action points. Make sure there's a start time and a deadline on the action points so that it's not, well, it's December, but which year, right? Make sure it's not a shared responsibility. Shared responsibility is useless. I have hard feelings about that. And specify the actions. Don't just say, more pair programming, better software architecture documentation. It has to be more specific than that. Otherwise, you don't know what to do, and you don't know whether you've done it or not. And prioritize the actions. And do not hide the action points. Make sure they're somewhere where you're looking every day, or at least once a week. And follow up on them regularly. Sometimes it could be at the next retrospectives, but sometimes, as I said, it could be in the stand-up meetings in the morning. So that's it, those 12 points. Have fun with your retrospectives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And now there are some books to win. I would say, as we don't want to exclude anybody, we put 2 more on this for the remote folks, so they tell us their reason why, yes, as you said, in the chat, please. Yeah, and maybe afterwards you can give them a feedback on the chat, right? Yeah. So first off, the first 2 books, yes, for the crowd here. Yep. The other 2 for the remote folks.
Yeah, good idea. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you. So you just come up here, give me a good reason.
Here's a microphone. Should I tell their reason in public?
Yes. Because if they don't want to say it in public, I'm not sure I want to hear it.
If you want to have a book,
don't be shy.
Come here. Yeah.
Right. Brave people. Very brave. Hi. So can you say to the microphone what the...
I would really like to learn how to make people shut up. And the octopus is really cute.
That's a very good reason. Thank you. There you go, Anissa.
Yes, I'm really a skeptic about retrospective. And I've seen so many failing totally, and very few which have been giving some results.
Yeah.
So let's see if I get some better hints here.
Yeah. So it's actually, I'm thanking you in the book then. Let me see if I can find it. I have to show my age by taking my glasses off. So finally, a big thank you to all the people who dislike retrospectives, try to avoid them, and sometimes even destroy them. Without you, this book would not have existed.
Okay, now let's look shortly to the chat.
Yep.
So here's a nice comment. New kind of punishment. Go into the group of the loudmouth. This is just a comment.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Are there good reasons in there?
If... Thank you. Well, one reason is because... Oh, sorry. Well,
oh, it's yours.
Because we have terrible retrospectives, says somebody. Is this a reason?
That's a good reason.
Okay,
yeah.
Then one book goes to Jochen Köberlein. Could somebody help me and write this down? Sorry,
I'm glad I don't have to pronounce that.
So, Jochen Köberlein.
Köberlein.
Yeah.
Jochen Köberlein.
Okay, there's another reason. Oh, it's always jumping.
Because there's new things coming up.
Yeah. So, this makes me crazy. So, here's Köberlein, and now, nice explanation. Because we have too many loudmouth and too many silent ones.
Yes, I think.
Okay, this is Mariano Mertinat. Mariano Mertinat. If somebody please clap, thank you.
Congratulations to
Okay,
Jochen
congratulations.
and Mariano.
2 books are going to be sent out to our remote folks. Cool. Good. Thank you very much, Aino, for this great keynote. I really think we should also watch this video again in our team, yeah? Because, of course, we do also retrospectives for doing hybrid conferences. It's super complicated.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
And hope to see you soon at one of the future on-site conferences.
I hope so too. I'll be around for a few
hours. Big applause,
hours.
please.
Yeah, thank you.